Hello and welcome to this second session of this seminar, and where we're going to talk a little bit about negotiating a deal for successful partnerships. Just before we start, obviously you've heard a little bit about Paraventchers, and to introduce myself, I'm Adrian Dawkes, Managing Director here at Paraventchers. Prior to joining Paraventchers, I was originally a scientist, immunologist and in CNS, and spent many years in big pharma and biotech, transitioning into the commercial world. For the past 12 years, I've been at Paraventchers, where I've been executing transactions, as well as doing a lot of the negotiation pieces at the end of deals, and successfully closing several out. So I've sat in many deal rooms with many negotiations. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, at a somewhat high level, some of the negotiation experiences, some of the things to look out for, and hopefully you can use those in your negotiations. Realise that many of you will be native Korean speakers and may not speak English so well, so I'll try and speak slowly. I do forget sometimes, but we'll try that. Okay, so first of all, let's just define negotiation. And this is a dictionary definition. Negotiation is the process of influence in which two or more people or entities with common or conflicting interests discuss ways of resolving an issue or completing a business transaction. Obviously, the most important one is the second one there, completing a business transaction, because that's what we're aiming to do here. But notice the common and conflicting interests, and through that negotiation process, what we're attempting to do is underline the common interests and resolve the conflicting ones so they all become common and we reach an agreement. And as it says there, negotiation has a specific purpose. It's an attempt to reach an agreement, and in this case, close a deal. So one of the first things you need to consider in a negotiation is who you're actually negotiating with. And secondly, are they at the table? It's not always the case that people who participate in negotiations are actually in the room. I'm going to refer to the room. Obviously, currently we're doing a lot of things remotely, and some negotiations will take place remotely. But for the purposes of this, let's assume people are in the room. And there are several groups, and you'll see some of them here. And right at the center, we have the decision maker, and that's a key player. That's the person who has the ability to give or take away, to actually sanction a deal or not sanction a deal. There are a couple of other people on the right-hand side there. The one at the bottom is the gatekeeper, and as you can see, they can be both a negative or a positive influencer on the process and the deal. They're the person that you might be in a position where you're dealing a lot with them. They're arranging the discussions. They're feeding back information from you to the other side and from them to you. So you need to have a good relationship with that person. Otherwise, they can make the negotiation process quite difficult. And as it says there, the decision maker is going to look to them to understand how the relationship is working. And if it isn't working well, then it's going to make life more difficult. The person at the top there, the champion, is very much a positive influencer. And it's quite likely that during the deal process, you will gain an internal champion on the other side. Hopefully that person is well versed in your technology and the area of your expertise as well. But because you've sort of got them involved and made them your champion, they're on your side, and they're influencing people internally to want to get the deal through. So they're kind of an adjunct member of your team, and you need to use them to best advantage. I'll give you an example, and I'll use some examples as we go through this. We were doing a deal with a major pharma, and it was very early on in the process, that sort of process that Summer has talked about. And initially, we engaged with this pharma partner and shared some non-confidential, a little bit of confidential information, and there were some discussions. And the way that company works is to send that information around to the various stakeholders, some of which, as you'll see here, and they fill a form in whether they think it's good and interesting and whether they should proceed with discussions. And it came back from all of those groups with a no, we're not interested in this. However, that individual saw the benefit of what we were presenting and was very much in favour of that, and took it upon himself to actually go around all of these people and explain more fully to what the technology was and why it was of benefit and what the advantages were, both from a scientific and a commercial perspective. And he was able to convert all those no's to a yes, this is interesting enough that we want to learn more. So that's a very key person that you're engaged with actually very early on in the process. And the earlier you can get an internal champion working and influencing for you within your target company, the better it will be for you and in the negotiation process. You'll see the third group there on the left, the deal impact group. That's a collection of people, and it may be made up of some or all of these, and they'll be representing technical, the R&D community, maybe the clinical development community, also legal, regulatory, sales and marketing. And they may come in and out of the process as you go through the negotiations, but all will have an influence on there. And it's important for you that you have equivalent expertise on your side or people with the right knowledge so that you can give them the information they need so that they can become a positive influencer on the ultimate decision maker who will say, yes, let's get this deal done, or the person that actually takes it. If it's a major pharma, usually it's somebody that will take it to the board or the CEO to get sign off. So you will interact with all those groups, and it's important that you get on well with as many, if not all of them. As you'll hear many times, people do deals with people, and therefore the relationship aspect of this is extremely important. Understanding the other side. It's very important that you have an understanding of your target company and what they do and the people in it. How to do that, you can do that well in advance, and you'll learn some of it through the process that Summer has talked about earlier, because there will be exchange of information. And that there through the intelligence aspects always, and that's a lot of internet work, but also looking at what they've done in the past, getting access to previous deal information that might be available, how they do their deals, but also through meeting other people from that company when you go to conferences and meetings, and just discussing with them, of course, without disclosing anything confidential. It may be that the deal you're negotiating is not widely known throughout the company, so you need to be careful about what you disclose. So it's all about questioning and asking lots of questions. The more you can learn, the better prepared you will be to understand your potential partner's needs and what they're looking for in the deal that they're planning to do with you. And therefore, you build your deal strategy around their need, and hopefully there is sufficient alignment between what your offering is and what their needs are, that strategy actually comes together very nicely. But if you can articulate it, that you can see where the fit is with their needs and what it is you're offering, then you're going to it'll lend for a much more beneficial negotiation, and those areas of consensus will outweigh those areas of conflict. And if you've done your homework on the other side and can articulate it to them, so you can talk about what you understand their needs to be, it starts building that relationship even stronger, because you're going to be working together in the future. It's good to show that you're as interested in them as they are in you. I can give another example here. We sat down with one of our clients and a US company that was seeking to do a deal with us. They wanted the asset we were bringing to market. And we asked them a series of questions. We'd done some homework on them, and they were presenting some financial figures on what they thought the deal might look like. And we questioned them because we'd looked into their financial background and on how they had come to those figures and had they done their homework on us. And it became quite clear that they hadn't done hardly any homework on us and what the value of our asset was. And therefore what they were putting on the table actually didn't make a lot of sense. And what that message said to us was, you're really not that interested in us at a level which makes it feel like you're the right partner for us. So you start making judgments around whether that partner is the right partner for you. And in fact, that deal offer was turned down through lack of homework on the other side. So let's talk a little bit about starting a negotiation and when does that actually happen? So a lot of people think it's when you get in that room and you think you've got some financial terms sort of set. It doesn't. The negotiation really starts the first time you meet that company. That might be at a partnering meeting, it might be over an email exchange, or at a conference or some other telephone call. Because from the moment you just start describing your offering and your asset and what that might be and where you think it fits, you're negotiating with them. You're telling them what you're about and what you're looking for. So be prepared in those situations, but also don't think this is not going to be involved part of what may come up later, because there will be instances of where you may disclose something and then it gets raised later. And if it wasn't entirely accurate, it can come back and cause a problem. The other important part in deals are about trust on both sides. And you need to be able to trust the other side, and they need to be able to trust you. So when you enter the real negotiation process, you'll have been through those stages that Summer talked about earlier, that deal process. There'll have been exchange of non-confidential and then confidential information. There'll have been some diligence conducted by the other side. It may not have been full yet. They may still have diligence to do. They'll have submitted an offer of some sort with some terms in. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. So you should have a pretty good idea of what they're looking for. And if, as we said before, you've done your homework on them, you'll have a pretty good idea on how well your offering fits for them. The financial side and what the offer is, it is usual practice for the licensee or acquirer, if it's an M&A, to put the first proposal on the table. And you should ask for enough detail around that term sheet so that you've got as full an understanding as possible. It avoids misunderstandings and makes for a better negotiation because both sides are more fully informed. And something that's easily forgotten is providing sufficient time in meetings and calls, and if they're direct or face-to-face or over the internet, and suitable facilities for negotiations. If it's virtual, the more you can do with video facilities is better, and we'll come on to why it's good to see the other faces that you're talking to later on. Moving on to the term sheets, what you need to do in your term sheets is have knowledge of the background, look at the market and understand what deals are being done in that market and the sort of terms that are around them and who's doing them. If your target is hopefully in that space, you will see the sort of deals they've done before and how they've structured those. Make sure you understand the value of your asset. Have a valuation done. Don't rely on the other side telling you what they're prepared to pay you for it. That does not set the value. That just sets what they would ideally like. And if you believe your asset is worth significantly more than that, then you should make that clear to the other side. A good idea is to have what we call an invisible internal term sheet, which covers the key elements of what you're looking for and what you expect to get from the other side, and use that internally for your own discussions. And what this may cover is the definition of what's on offer. Are you licensing something? Is it just technology? Are there patents involved? Will there be know-how, which is proprietary and secret, and when should you disclose that? Are there processes that you'll have to transfer? Is there a manufacturing element to it, or are you retaining that? All of these things you need to have knowledge of in the term sheet. Who's going to do what going forwards? Of course, there will be financial terms in there, including upfronts, milestones, and royalties if it's a typical deal structure. And as some have talked about previously, there's elements within that term sheet of the things you must have in a deal, the things that absolutely you need, things that you would like to have, and things that you can live without. And what you need to do with those is convert these into, as we say here, the red lines and the trading points. When you go in to follow up on the proposal, and maybe you'll be making a counter proposal, what you don't do is go in and say the exact thing that you want, because then you've got no room for maneuver. And if the other side doesn't accept that, you could end up losing some elements that you really need. So it's good to have a bank of things that you may wish to trade during the process, because there will be points at which you will have to trade with the other side, because they will be asking for things that you don't want to give. As I said earlier, the licensee is usually expected to make the first proposal with some financial terms. quite often, and I've heard this from parties, is should we tell the other side what we're expecting them to put down in terms of how much we want? And the traditional answer is no. And there are several reasons for this. Usually, you're in a competitive process where there are multiple parties. And if you signal to one party that you want a certain set of terms and all the other parties put down better terms, you're likely to exclude the party you indicated to. And then they'll feel bad, and so will you, because you didn't give them very good figures. So it's better not to do that. What you can do is give guidance, and you can do that in the terms of the sort of elements you want in there. And if they want numbers, you can use historic deals which have similar components and similar numbers, and share those with the other side, and give an indication that this is the way you are thinking and you would like to see something similar to that. In that instance, it's okay to cherry pick a comparable deal as the one that's closest to what you might be looking for. And we'll talk about the sort of cherry picking of deals a little bit as well later. You should set a price expectation that's at the high end of what's reasonable for your asset. You shouldn't ask for too much. Some people think if we ask high and more than what it's worth, then when we come down, it's easier to get the figure that we want. But if you start too high, the other side will have done their research on the market and the value of assets in that market, hopefully in much the same way that you have done your valuation, and they will think you're overpricing this and you will lose credibility. And they could walk away and say your expectations are too far apart, we're not going to get to a deal, and you can lose it early. Whatever you set it at, you have to be in a position to justify it. Again, that's where the valuation work comes in, and also deal comparables. Deal comparables are very useful because they unlike a theoretical, say, discounted cash flow, where that is theory, deal comparables are actual deals where people paid real money for real assets, so they actually happened, and they're good examples of industry practice. Obviously, there's the opposite. You could ask for too little. Again, whilst the other side might be highly delighted at that because they're going to get an asset that's less than they thought they were going to have to pay for it, but there's also the risk that you'll lose credibility as well. Because if you're not valuing your asset appropriately, they may think that it has issues with it that you haven't yet disclosed. So you need to be careful with that too. If you do have differences in valuations of what you think the thing is worth and what the other side think it's worth, you should explore these in an open way as far as possible before changing your numbers or they change theirs. Because quite often, a lot of valuation estimates of value are based around assumptions, i.e. the assumption of how much market share you might get, what territories you might be entering, how long your patents will last, when competition might come in, and they can be big influencers on overall value. So in sharing your assumptions and their assumptions, not necessarily all of them, but in a exchanging manner, so you don't just display them all, you then have the opportunity to discuss them and understand where differences are, and then understand how possible it might be to change any assumptions, either yours or theirs, to arrive at value elements where you're quite closely aligned. That's important because the negotiation is about other things than value, and you don't want to spend the whole negotiation talking about value. Keep the counter proposals to a minimum wherever possible. You don't want too much back and forth on those. Again, otherwise there's a chance you will lose credibility because it's seen you're too flexible almost, and you don't understand the value of your asset. So you need to defend your position. So that open discussion on how you got to your assumptions helps to establish how differences arose. It leads to better understanding and then avoidance of misunderstandings and disagreements later on, and deals with issues up front and very readily. And that can make the negotiation process a little faster and more and easier. So I'll just give you an example on the value elements because we talked about those. And here's a well-known Korean company that we were delighted to have as one of our clients, and you may well be familiar with this deal. Yuhan were already in discussions with a number of parties having been through a process, and were actually negotiating with the ultimate partner. And they came to us and said, we need to understand the value and we want it done independently. The person doing the negotiation was actually a very accomplished negotiator and didn't need us to do that bit for him. But as you see here, they have this clinical candidate, an EGFR TKI, for treatment of non-small cell lung cancer, a very, very busy space. And the third and fourth generation TKIs are forecast to do extremely well in the market. The leading player in the market at the moment is Tagrisso from AstraZeneca. That is doing extremely well, both for patients and for AstraZeneca. They talked to a number of potential licensees. They settled on one. They wanted to understand the value. There was a precedent deal which they'd highlighted where actually the asset had failed, but they wanted a deal like that, which was very high value. And so they wanted the defensible arguments, so that if the other side didn't think it was worth as much, they could bring data to the table to show that actually it was worth what they thought it was. So we undertook the valuation on their behalf. We did a thorough market assessment. We also did some theoretical modelling, DCF valuation modelling on forward sales and what that might be and what that meant to today's value through the discounting process. We looked at other deal structures so that how the value might be segmented between upfronts, milestones, royalties, and what it should look like. Incidentally, when you read press releases, they'll talk about total deal values. Quite often, that is just the composition of an upfront and the milestones. Royalty elements don't get counted in that necessarily, and they may refer to royalties or may not. So bear in mind, if you're thinking, well, I want a deal that looks like that, it doesn't include everything, and also those milestone components are normally paid much later in the future, and therefore the value on paper is different from the discounted value. They're undiscounted. So we also conducted comparable benchmarking to give a more holistic view of what the deal should look like. We held many meetings with Yuhan, and they were very challenging. They thought we should change the numbers because they thought they should be higher. And we stood our ground and said, no, the data does not support that. It would be inappropriate and you will lose credibility. They used the outputs in the negotiations with Janssen, J&J, and were able to secure this deal, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, where they received an upfront payment of $50 million US. Milestones of 1.2 billion and a royalty element too for this third generation drug. And they have since, both publicly and elsewhere, said that the valuation elements that we did, and J&J also acknowledged this, were extremely important to getting the deal closed successfully because it was independent and had robust components to it. So it's extremely important to do as thorough a job as you can on that. And as it turned out, those deal values were actually at the high end of our valuation. So the negotiators did a good job, but also we were correct in sticking to the numbers that we said were appropriate for that particular deal. Okay, so those are all very positive things that go on in negotiations. There will be objections. There will be things that you don't like that the other side will propose and say, and there will be things that you will propose and say that they don't like. But it's okay. The point of the negotiation is to understand those objections, discuss them and overcome them, and hopefully get to a deal. So the first thing is to listen and understand exactly what the objection is. And if that means you should have translational capability in the negotiating room, that's a good thing to do. And reflect it back to the other side, say, have I understood what the objection is here? And as it says there, try and understand the scale of the objection. Is this a deal breaker? Is this something that they're going to say, if we can't get this, we're not going to go forward? Or is it something that they just would like to have? And if it's a like to have, you can probably resolve it. It's probably resolvable more easier. Be wary of people who say that every objection is a deal breaker for them, because it's probably not true and there will be room for some movement. Ask them lots of questions. Get clarification on what the objection is and the scale of the objection. And is it a technical or a commercial or a corporate objection or a strategic objection? Again, show that you understand what the objection is and that it may not have occurred to you that would be an objection from them, but you can see from their position that why they might be objecting, and that you will actually do what you can to work with them to seek a resolution. And look at it as a question, is they're asking you to do something to make it possible for them to move forward. So how can you do that? And then can you turn that to your advantage? And that brings us back to what we talked about earlier, about using things to trade off. So if it's an objection that actually you're okay to give, you might want to adopt a position of this is something that's important to you. Don't just give it away straight away. Think about things that you want to achieve. And is there an element in there that they may have signaled is difficult for them that you can trade off to say, well, look, if we give you that, that's very hard for us, but we're going to need something back in return to make our position easier. And you find that is in fact possible, and that's one of the arts of negotiation. Be very careful what you disclose. Try and avoid surprise. I'll give you an example again. I was in a negotiation in Tokyo with a Japanese company, a large Japanese corporate, with a company that was looking to be acquired by this Japanese company. And we'd been quite robust. We'd set a price. They'd came back and made an offer, and we'd said, no, this is the price. And I was accompanied by two executives from our client, the selling company. And during the conversation, one of those individuals said, if we don't get this deal, we'll close the company and we'll liquidate it. And right there, he placed the whole of the negotiation for us in a very weak position, because the other side immediately knew that they were the only company we were negotiating with, and B, they could adopt well, this is our best offer, take it or leave it. And we did lose some value. They didn't move back to the value we wanted, but we got to a position which was okay. So we did get back on the negotiation and achieve some way back, but it was a surprise to me, and actually an inappropriate thing to do in a negotiation. So make sure all of the people on your side understand if there are things that should not be said during an open meeting, and that they don't say them. Because it's very easy to get wrapped up in the process and say things. As a quick aside, quite often negotiations will be accompanied by social events. You will have a dinner with the other side. There may be a opportunity to have a few drinks or something, and that's quite normal. And they may discuss things with you. Be very careful what you disclose. You're no longer in a formal setting, and some people will use that to try and gain information from you that then subsequently can be used to their advantage. So keep the social things social, keep the business things business. So going back to objections, as we said there, explore how you could change what you're asking for or what you're refusing to overcome the objection. Is this something you can give, or is it something you can trade either now or later? And it is quite normal for both sides to raise issues, and several of them. Some of them will be relatively easy to overcome. Some of them will be more difficult. Some of them will be quite hard, and both sides may have things that they feel they can't give. If you've discussed them and you can't get to anywhere close to a resolution, don't be afraid to say, can we put that issue to one side and come back to it? We'll make an issues list for both sides, and each side will have different issues. And then at certain points, separate from the negotiating room or negotiation discussion and go and discuss them amongst yourselves and try and come up with solutions of what you can. By now, you'll understand that they have a list of things and you have a list of things, so you can look for those trade-offs and see what you can do to reach agreement. And as it says there, remember, it's about reaching agreement, not about winning and losing or feeling like you've come out on top compared to the other side. So what else should you have in place when you go into a negotiation? And one of the most important things you have is what's referred to as a BATNA. You may have heard that term, but if you haven't, the BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So what's your fallback position if things go wrong and you can't get to an agreement? What are you going to do? Because if you don't have a BATNA, you're either forced into we accept what we're being offered, or we don't have a deal. So BATNAs, there are several ways of handling. What they can be is, in an extreme case, walking away. You can say, right, we're not doing the deal, and walk off. And some people will then come back to the table. It's quite an aggressive and extreme example. What you can do is say, we're going to have to go away and consider this and take a period of time. And you can prolong it and say, we're finding this very difficult, and see if the other side will then modify their opinion. It can be going to another company. You may have got to a position, again, in that process that someone talked about, where you had two leading players, and that's quite normal, and you selected one of those two. It's okay to go back to the other company and say, the negotiations aren't progressing as we'd hoped. We'd like to reopen discussions with you. Now, they may feel a little bit aggrieved because you turned them down and may then come back with a slightly altered offer, but that may still be better than what you're currently faced with from what was your lead company. And what you could do is say, well, given that what we don't seem to be able to get to an agreement here that's satisfactory to us, you might be at a stage of development where you could go on and do more work, take your asset to the next inflection point, and then come back to the market. Again, talk to this original company again, but also talk to the other companies, because you've now got a different proposition that actually may be worth more and has less risk associated with it. What BATNAs must be is you must have thought them through. You should not do it on the fly, faced with an offer, a proposal that you don't like. Just think, well, I can go do something else. Have it in mind, but have a realistic BATNA. So if you don't, your options are weak. And as I mentioned, that previous example where the participant in the negotiation disclosed that we had no alternatives if they didn't take the asset. We had no BATNA. They might have thought we did. His BATNA was, I close the company and lose all my money, which really isn't a very strong BATNA. In some cases, it's okay to disclose your BATNA to the other side, which is, again, a little bit confrontational, and say, look, if we can't get beyond this, we're going to go and do X, but we'd like to do the deal now. And you should also think about what the other side's alternatives may be. The deal process is very competitive. There are a lot of people out there competing for the same deal with your partner, and they may have turned other ones down that they were quite close to accepting, and that may be their BATNA, that if they can't get to an agreement with you, they will go and do the next deal in line, which may not be quite as good as yours, but they feel they can work with that party and not work with you. So do think about the other side's BATNAs. So it's great when it's all working. Everyone assumes it's going to be successful and you're going to have a great partnership, and therefore it's all going to be fine. And actually, all the positive things are usually easier to negotiate. Not entirely easy, but always easy. But things always don't always go as planned. Otherwise, all deals would all lead to drugs that are better, and we'd have lots more drugs on the market. Things you need to think about. Be clear about how much you want to be involved and articulate that to the other. And understand how much they want you to be involved. If your asset is very technically involved, they may want you involved for quite a long way along, and you need to be prepared to do that. But obviously that has value implications if you're participating and you're still taking risk. But there will come a point where they don't need you. That said, you may still wish to be involved just from a learning perspective. It's fine to say that and articulate that, but they have to be happy for you to do that and learn alongside them. But it's okay to ask. However, things can go wrong, and what if one of these few things happens? The partner changes strategy and says, we're no longer, this indication is no longer as important to us, we're going to move resources off it, and therefore we're not going to do what we said we were going to do. When you get to the negotiation, you're going to negotiate in elements which are commercially reasonable efforts. They should be bounded with things like of a typical biotechnology or a typical pharmaceutical company that is as equivalent to your partner. Otherwise, it's very difficult to enforce. And you should think about if that happens, so then what will they do? And you may not be able to set the changes in terms, and they may be financial, that they will compensate for deprioritizing and maybe taking longer or not even getting your asset to market. But you do need to consider them in the negotiation and ask the question, what will happen if? And here's a couple more. everything's going fine, but the clinical trial misses its endpoint, so the partner wants to renegotiate because they've got to spend more money. They still believe it can get there, but they want to renegotiate. Or something else has come along to change the market dynamics and they don't believe that they're going to achieve the same revenues. You need to have some degree of flexibility, but it's probably better in those instances that you don't include that in the contract, but be aware of it in your negotiations. Clinical trials fail, they do all the time. And the partner says, okay, we gave it our best shot, but we don't want to do this anymore. We want to give it back to you. And if they want to do that, it's now damaged goods. And everybody will know it because they will have seen that you did the deal with them and they were going to take it to market and now they're not taking it to. So what do you want to get back? If you reach that point and it has to come back, well, you'll want the physical assets back. You'll want the IP back, and that's your IP. And they may have used some of their own IP to develop your asset further. And you will need to get access to that if you're to continue to develop it, if you're dependent upon it. Of course, you'll want all the data. They will want to be waived of any liability if you take it forward, because if it makes it to market and you're relying on earlier clinical data that they did, and then there are adverse events which they said were safe, they don't want to be held accountable to that. So you will need to take that on. You should look to get some money back because they've damaged your asset and you're not going to get all the things that they said you were going to get in the deal originally, so that you do have an ability to continue the development. It's important that actually getting out of a deal is just as important as getting in, and negotiation around those elements, the things you will need to cover for getting out, are just as hard and often harder than the things that you intend and everybody expects to achieve. Again, an example, there was a company now actually no longer exists called Antisoma. They had a drug, it was in oncology, I can't remember what it was, but they licensed the same drug out 3 times because it came back because of clinical trial failures. They did a bit more work, licensed it again, did a bit more work, and it came back, and then they licensed it again. And each time it came back, they got a significant amount of money and were able to do work and then license it again to resolve those issues. So you could probably look that one up. Again, and sadly the company didn't make it because it had other issues, but it's possible to have a tainted asset, it come back and relicense it again and still be successful. As someone said earlier, deals are done by people with people. And hopefully you do get to meet face to face and you can see the behaviour of the participants. And it's important to do that so you can read the room. Do some research, understand the background of each person in the room, what their role in the process is. Are they technical? Are they commercial? And what do you expect from them? And have the counterpart on your side. It might just be one person that's going to address all of those, but you need the expertise in the room covering off all those different areas. See if you can identify who's actually making the decisions in the room. It's possible that will become obvious or slightly obvious because other people on their side will defer to a particular individual when it gets to difficult decisions. Again, I can give an example. In a deal room, there was one person in there who hadn't participated in the process up until we got to this point. Very senior, was in there. His participation, if you watched how he behaved, things that he was very relaxed about, he sat back in his chair, he was smiley, he was happy. It was becoming clear that he was the key individual because in discussions with, say, the technical folks, if an issue came up, they would look to him to give a final okay or no, yay or yes or no. And similarly for legal and commercial aspects. If things were being discussed that he didn't like, he would sit forward in his chair and fold his arms every time. So you could get a gauge on what things you were likely to have a problem with and what things you weren't, and they were quite relaxed about. And it's very telling. So do observe the room. You may want to have somebody in there who's there as a note taker, who can observe the room and see what's going on. Says things can get heated sometimes and people do argue. I found lawyers argue more than other people, but that's probably their job. That's not a bad thing, but it's not personal. This is about being open, discussing things openly to get to a resolution. Sometimes using professional negotiators can help here because they're separate from the forward interaction where you will be working with these people going forwards. So you need to have a good relationship, but you can't abdicate all responsibility for doing that. As it says there, if you conclude it successfully, you will be working and having a relationship with those people going forwards for potentially many years. And so if you can put some of these things into practice and some of your own methods as well, I wish you good luck with your negotiations. If you do need any help out there and want support, it is available from companies like Pa마벤처스. I hope this has been useful, and we can move to the next session. Thank you.